good evening. And as you make your way to the seats, I'd like to welcome you. I'm Gene Policinski. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Newseum Institute, which is the programs and outreach arm of the Newseum. We'd like to welcome you to the Knight Conference Center and to the Newseum. The Newseum, its programs, our institute, comprise really the only organization in the world dedicated to free expression and the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment. Of course, religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. You may have noticed our modest little 74-foot marble plaque on the front of the building, which we feel is very instructive to have facing Pennsylvania Avenue as people travel up and down, just the occasional traveler. We work to ensure that these fundamental freedoms remain strong and protected, both today and for future generations. Our exhibits, our education efforts, because we are also a school, our programs online and in person inform, illuminate, and we hope remind us all of the importance and fragility of these basic human rights, the right to express ideas, to speak freely, to communicate, to publish, to offer our opinions. We hope that we help others in the United States and around the world explore the meaning of freedom in an age of challenging and continual technological innovation. This program is particularly important to us, and we're so pleased to have you here tonight, both for the specific work that it will recognize and discuss, but also as a means of reminding this audience and the audience watching us through live stream, and by the extension, the American public, that contrary to some reports, the good work of a free press continues, both in a traditional press and in new media. The newer forms of news organizations, with journalists young and old, continually reinvigorate that process of being a watchdog in government. You know, while there's great political capital today to attacking the media, decrying that vague target, the news media, the work recognized and discussed tonight, I think is an essential part of the larger message that journalism matters because the work that journalists do matter. Specifically tonight, the threat posed by the largely unregulated, at times unexamined industry that can at times position armed people in our midst with a bare modicum, if any, of training and public accountability. So to the Livingston Awards, the University of Michigan, the Knight Foundation, and the Indian Trails Charitable Foundation, thank you. Your ongoing work helps our nation remember that the founders constructed those very strong protections for a free press, despite the partisan press of their era, which probably would have sent the politicians today, you know, sort of huddling in the basement, frankly. They so valued the role of an independent press to be a watchdog on government and to be our watchdogs on what goes on in our society. To our discussants, the Newseum and Newseum Institute welcome you in this presentation for what you have done and what you will no doubt do in the future. You are supporting a free and robust press, whatever the technological terms and the corporate structures are. That's the essential strength of this nation. It is the fundamental purpose of protection in the First Amendment of a free press, and we're very honored by your presence here tonight. So thank you again for being with us.
Hi, I'm Charles Eisendrath. I'm the director of the Livingston Awards, and I want to introduce you to several things, actually. But first, I want to introduce you, of course, to the hashtag for this event, which is LiveGuards. So all of you streaming or whatever you're doing, hashtag it is. I want to introduce the idea that the Livingston Awards have been going for 35 years. So what exactly are we doing here now for the first time? That leads me immediately to thank the people that Gene has just mentioned. Number one, the Newseum. Secondly, the Knight Foundation, the University of Michigan, the Indian Trail Foundation, and others who have contributed to the Livingston Awards, because the essential nature of this program not only concentrates on the quality of journalism, but also specifically young journalists, the people who will inherit the traditions that we have tried so hard to build and sacrificed so much to build. From day one, 35 years ago, the prizes were set up specifically to do two things that were and remain unique. One is to be limited to young journalists. There are plenty of prizes around for people of any age, whatever. These are limited to journalists under the age of 35. Second, from day one, we opened it to all media. In those days, this was the 80s, 1980 to be exact, this was revolutionary. And of course, we had no idea exactly what all media was going to come to mean. But alone of the journalism prizes, we haven't really had to change anything because we were open from the beginning to anything that came along. And boy, did it come along. We are happy to have given prizes to online journalists, to conventional media journalists, and everything in between, and this will continue. They're also the largest all-media prizes in the country, as far as we know, and the fact that this is reserved for the young, I think, is particularly appropriate, particularly because they're lodged at a large public university in the middle of the country. I think that's a wonderful symbol. The introduction I want to make is to the national winners of this year's prize. We decided, actually at the suggestion of the Knight Foundation, to broaden the appeal of the winners, broaden the impact of the winners, because journalists know that the people who win these prizes are amazing young people. There's a prize for local, national, international reporting, but it's not broadcast to general audiences the importance of what great journalism can be, and these national winners exemplify it to a T. Shoshana Walter and Ryan Gabrielson picked up on a topic that really was under everybody's radar. But when you think of it, when you think of the concentration these days on firearms, regulation thereof, and personal security, it's astonishing that we haven't had reams of material about their topic, which is the basically highly unregulated business of private security. There are people from the security industry here. We're going to welcome their questions. And while I'm talking about questions, I want to introduce also one of our folkways in the Livingston Awards. We welcome questions at the end of the session, and alumni from the Knight Wallace Fellows Program will be circulating little pieces of paper. Please write down on that piece of paper your question. They will winnow them, they'll edit them, not to edit any one question asker, but to make sure we don't get all the same questions, and to make sure we have a modicum of diversity of all sorts. So when you're through getting a question, raise your hand. They will come around, pick up your piece of paper, and bring it forward to David Greene, the host of NPR's signature morning show, who is a screener in the Livingston Awards, and he will ask the questions after he's through moderating the panel. So could I ask the panel to come forward, and we'll begin. Well, there are three of you here. There we are. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Good. I like that energy. Charles, thank you for bringing us all together tonight. And I want to say one word about you. Because of who you are, you would tell us over and over again that this night is about the two people on either side of me. But I want to mention that you are retiring from Livingston this year, and you are going to be sorely, sorely, sorely missed. I know you will be around and with us all the time, which is reassuring. And I promise you that while you're not officially leading the awards and us, we are going to carry on this legacy in every way imaginable. But while a night like this is about the two people on either side of me, you have created the showcase for them. You have brought us all together, and your energy is infectious. Your good humor, carries us all forward, and your dedication to this profession, it inspires all of us. And the optimism that I'm left with about this profession and what I do every day, because of you, I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful feeling. And so thank you for bringing us all together tonight, and thank you for everything you have done. When I think about this day, being a journalist in radio, this has been the craziest day imaginable, but it's pretty typical. I woke up at 2:30 in the morning and spent 9 hours going from one topic to another, to another, to another, feeling like, I was run over by a train at some points, talking to people on the ground in Jakarta, and then talking to our food correspondent about chocolate cake, and then talking to the founder of a new women's hockey league, and then talking to an Air Force general about concerns about Russia's surface-to-air missile buildup in Eastern Europe. And it's insane, this business we're in. But the conversation I was most looking forward to was tonight. And it's really a privilege to be involved in Livingston. When Charles called me a couple years ago and asked me to be a judge, it was a no-brainer. I was really honored. Little did I know what I was getting into. All of the entries for my region arrived in my inbox in a link, and I just started printing them all out, probably killing innumerable trees. And my wife came in and saw me with this stack. It was about this big. And I was literally buried in this stack for days and didn't get to see my wife, didn't get to have dinner, didn't really eat all that much. But you know what? I was obsessed and addicted because it was reading journalism, it was watching journalism coming from this young generation. And it feels so good to be able to say, especially in this building and in this shrine to this profession, that if you have any doubts about there being a young generation committed to the principles of journalism, if you have any doubts about whether journalists still play the watchdog role that is so, so crucial, if you have any doubts about whether journalists are still taking truth to power, I'm glad you're here tonight because those doubts will be put to rest. Journalism has changed so much, and there have been stories suggesting that it's neared its demise, but wow, that couldn't be farther from the truth. So that is my spiel for the night. And it's just really great to share a stage with the two of you. And I guess I would love to start with both of you just sort of briefly introducing yourselves and telling us, it's sort of the journalism equivalent of a first date. But when there's a reporting team who comes together and really works so well together, it's sort of you want to know how you two came together and started working with one another.
Well, before I got involved, Sho had done a significant amount of legwork, so maybe I should let her introduce how this all started coming together and then how I crashed the party.
Yeah. Right before I joined the Center for Investigative Reporting, I was a local crime reporter in Oakland, California. And there was a kind of small story that I did there, basically about these taco truck owners in Oakland's Fruitvale district who had banded together and decided to hire armed security guards to patrol the areas between their trucks. And the Fruitvale district is a heavily Hispanic neighborhood in Oakland. There are a lot of undocumented immigrants who live there. There's a lot of cash, so it's really attracted a lot of armed robberies. And at the time, there was a police force that was pretty decimated from budget cuts, and people would call the police. It would take forever for them to show up. So these taco truck owners basically had had enough of it, and they decided to hire armed guards. So when I heard about this, I wrote a story about it, but it just sort of planted a seed in my head, In a city and a country, really, that is so concerned about police use of force and civil rights violations, why is it that these people have decided to hire armed security guards? And how are armed guards regulated? Who's training them? Who's overseeing them? What happens when a security guard shoots his or her gun? Is there an internal affairs investigation like there is for police officers? So it just sort of planted that seed in my mind, and I started looking into the situation in California. And around the same time, there were a series of mass shootings. There was a shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, Afterwards, Wayne LaPierre from the NRA famously said, suggested that we hire more good guys with guns, and it sort of led to this broader question that led to this national look at the state of regulations in the United States for armed security guards.
Now, how'd you bring on this guy?
My editors were wise to see that it's a lot of work to look at an entire country, because as we found out, the regulations and laws are very different in each state. So, so they joined Ryan and I together to work on this.
And did you see the story here as soon as you started working with Shoshana?
I could see that there was going to be a significant story. I didn't, I'm not good at predicting where things are going to head, because they always turn, especially on something of this size that involves this much heavy lifting. The best story is going to be the thing that you can't anticipate. But I could see, so it was right. The editors at CIR came to me and said, reporter Shoshana Walter has got this amazing story, and it's just physically crushing for one person. And so, are you interested? I'm like, well, they told me a little bit about it. So it's like, okay, so an industry that is regulated how, we don't know, is asked to protect people in ways that are fairly new for them. And there doesn't appear to be oversight. Yeah, there's probably going to be something there.
There might be something there.
There might be something there. And Show is incredibly gracious to, open up a spot for me at the table, and we got to work.
And so define for us, if you can, we're talking about armed guards, you also call them hired guns. Who exactly are we talking about here?
It is, and that's an interesting question, that it's shifting, it seems to be, as the number of sort of functions that this industry is being asked to fill changes. But it's basically security guards, as you traditionally know, people who wear, uniforms that look like police officers, but they, say various private firms on them, who are tasked with observing and reporting, but are now more and more being put in situations that might be hostile. And maybe Show can give a more technical definition.
Yeah, I mean, hired guns or security guards with guns work everywhere, from schools to train stations to banks to Whole Foods. I get so many text messages from friends who spot armed guards at Whole Foods.
You get these text messages all the time now?
Yeah, like all the time, yeah.
I'm in a restaurant, there's an armed guard behind me. What do you think of that? Should I be worried?
That's right. So they're used everywhere, and they often have the appearance of law enforcement officers, but they don't have nearly the same legal authorities. I mean, a law enforcement officer can arrest, can detain, can search, and can do searches and seizures. A security guard has the same power to arrest, by and large, as any of us do. A security guard can make a citizen's arrest and then call the police to actually bring that person into custody. But when you put someone in a uniform with a gun, it often creates the appearance of authority that security guards simply do not have.
Before we get to some of the real stunning problems that you two uncovered, I think it's worth pointing out something that you made sure to point out throughout your stories, that there are a lot of people in these jobs who have the best of intentions, are trained well. I mean, you are not suggesting that everyone who is an armed guard is a menace or potentially dangerous.
Not in the slightest.
And we talk to a lot of people in the security industry who have consistently called for better, stronger regulations, and a lot of security guards themselves who feel like the training should be much higher than it is. So I would say, yeah, a lot of guards do this job really well, and studies have shown that in some situations, the presence of a guard, not necessarily armed, but the presence of a guard can deter and actually prevent crime.
And you also mentioned the NRA, and after Newtown, the now famous statement from Wayne LaPierre saying that good guys with guns can prevent bad guys with guns doing bad things.
The only thing I thought he said.
But my impression from reading your piece was that, while access to guns is certainly a theme that is infused throughout this, this is not sort of you're not taking on a debate about the Second Amendment. I mean, this is looking at sort of loopholes at an industry where you have found situations in which people who are really potentially dangerous can get access to guns. This is not suggesting that there aren't good people out there that might have guns and protect us.
Of course, and we interviewed a number of guards who were only carrying because their employer said, we have a contract now with at a certain place, and they have specifically asked for you to be armed. And they weren't necessarily even inclined to do that in the first place. So no, we're not making it, there's nothing about this that was, this was a look at safety practices inside of an industry that is being required or being expected to change very rapidly.
So tell me where you started to see the potential real loopholes that could put people in these positions who just shouldn't be there. What were some of the stories that stood out early on, and help us understand where the danger really is?
Well, in any investigation, it's the best practice is try to figure out what's the one question we're trying to answer here. And in this case, it was right after Newtown when I came on, and we sort of tried to formulate a plan of attack for how do we take on a sprawling national story. And the question that kind of rose to the top immediately without much debate, as I recall, was, okay, so what is the effect of armed security guards in hostile situations? That it was a very tightly defined thing that we believe we would be able to quantitatively measure. And then
you're wondering if they reduce the chance for violence or for a situation to escalate.
It's hard to prove a negative, and so it's not a matter of and crime data. Period is in terms of being able to analyze police practices and what effect they have can be sketchy business. So we were wanting to find out in situations where they are compelled to use their gun or are presented with a hostile situation that we now expect them to interject themselves into. What happened? And so so once we'd figured out that question, then how do you answer it? And we start looking for data. And maybe I'll let Sho take over, because really the search for data and records on this is what kind of helped us figure out a lot of the sort of the themes.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a synthesis, and there were multiple things going on at the same time. So we asked this question, and at the same time, we were surveying the entire country to find out what the regulations are. And so one of the things that we found out is that in most of the country, the laws on the books basically state that, in 12 states in the United States, the laws on the books state that regulators are required to collect any report of a security guard related shooting. And once they get those reports, they're supposed to be investigated, and then they determine whether or not the guard is still fit to be a licensed armed security guard. Or
this is only 12 states require that if there's some shooting by one of these hired guards,
right,
they want to know what happened and they have to report it.
Right.
38 states
trust.
It's
right.
just they just trust.
Or don't want to. They do not require reporting of any kind.
Okay.
Right.
That's sort of stunning.
It is. It's pretty stunning. It's interesting. So when we discovered that in these 12 states there were these laws on the books, we thought maybe this could be a good source of data, because these states will be monitoring and tracking the number of security guard shootings and what exactly the circumstances of those shootings were. So we requested those reports, and they started coming in, or in some cases not coming in. And
they weren't just ready to hand it over every day.
That's right. It's always a little bit of a battle with public records requests.
We'll talk more about that later.
But in several states, there were regulators who were not even aware of the laws on the books, that they did not know that they were required to, for example, in Minnesota, required to publish an annual statistical report of security guard shootings. So they didn't have any reports at all. And then in many other states, Georgia, for example, over a 4-year period, they had 4 reports of security guard shootings. But in the news and based on police reports alone, we counted 23 security guard shootings in that same time period. And 21 of those 23 shootings resulted in injuries or deaths. So once the state received those reports, they didn't really do anything with them. There was not really much of an investigation, and those guards were allowed to continue working as armed guards, and they were allowed to keep their guns.
And was this just a problem that was beneath the radar? Was it the kind of thing that states just didn't have the resources, the money to dedicate to following up on these issues?
Resources are largely about priorities. No, they'd never been in a position, most of the country had never been there was never an outcry that this had to be monitored. And it was just one more thing that wasn't taken seriously, it seems. It was not viewed as an industry that was deeply involved in public safety and in protecting people. It was treated, their mission, at least as oftentimes as the rules and regulations that are actually written, observe and report. Well, if it's observe and report, what do we have to do here? Can we just leave this business alone? The industry itself has actually been one of the most significant voices for, can we get some uniform set of requirements for what everybody needs to know and do and how we're supposed to operate? Because it's kind of chaos for them, having, especially big companies that operate across a number of states.
There was one statistic, and correct me if I don't have it right, but that if there is a bank robbery, it is 3 times more likely that a bank robbery will turn violent if an armed guard is present. Do I have that?
There's a lot of close to truth there.
Okay,
No.
that's good. We go for close to truth.
So in the pursuit of quantitative measures, Sho was leading the fight and the compilation of what there was for firearm discharge reports. I went looking for a data set that would allow us to answer the question, what happens in hostile situations when there's an armed guard versus when there isn't. And I don't remember the stroke of luck that led me to the FBI's bank crimes database. But the FBI posts summary tables showing an incredible array of fields about everything you might want to know about bank crimes that are reported to the FBI every year. And one of the fields was there an armed guard present? And it was like, oh, thank God. Whoa.
That must have been a good moment. You slept well that night.
Well, it was a good moment, and then I realized, I've got to request something from the Justice Department. This was one of the easier requests I've ever had in my career in dealing with any federal agency, let alone the FBI. It only took them 7 months to produce a database that they had sitting on there. Only 7 months. That's record. It was a pretty impressive database in that, of course, it documents whether there was an armed guard, but also all these outcome variables. Were people hurt? Who was hurt? How many of them? Did an ink bomb blow up? It was all everything you could want to know. And so I could see that it would allow us to run a more sophisticated analysis, logistic regression analysis, to possibly tease out the relationship, if there was one, between armed guards. And what we found was that a violent event, meaning an escalation to where it went from the threat of something to an actual, whether it was a scuffle or discharge of a weapon, violent events were 3 times more likely when there was an armed guard present, which establishes a relationship. It doesn't explain the cause, but it was statistically significant. It was the strongest relationship of any of the variables and violence.
And it turns out too that it's something that the insurance and banking industries have known for quite some time. Over time, armed guards have been posted less at banks. And so it's just sort of an accepted wisdom now that when an armed guard is present, it can lead to more liability, to more violence.
I'm remembering when I was in college in Boston, there was an armed guard who I guess was sort of overseeing a money transfer from a bank, and just ended up being a shootout in the middle of Harvard Square, which a lot of people said, had there not been someone armed there overseeing that, it would never have happened. Okay, so it's kind of the pieces are coming together now. You two became really interested in this industry. It was a time when there are more people in these roles, when there have been these mass shootings.
And laws changing to put these folks into schools and into environments where they'd never been before.
The rush to kind of protect schools and protect
Yes.
places. And you're getting not just realizing that there's a lack of oversight and follow-up, but seeing some of these links that suggesting that armed guards can actually create a more violent situation. So let's hear about one story that really can kind of teach us about how this can play out and what the consequences might be. And I was sitting in a cafe earlier today rereading your stories, and I mean, there's so many anecdotally that, I mean, I was just sort of sipping my soup and almost like spitting it out.
Try to
They're
beat you
so
into a
stunning.
stupor.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a strip club in Miami that really stood out to me and was the one I'd love you both to kind of take a deep dive on and really convey what happened. I think you have a slide of one of the people involved,
Oh,
right?
yeah, where's the slide clicker?
I should not have the clicker. You want the clicker?
Emotion.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. There we go.
On the left, right, Lucas?
Yeah, Lucas Kendall.
Okay.
I should preface this by saying, I mean, one of the things that we learned is that most of the country does not check when regulators are vetting armed security guard applicants. They don't typically check whether that guard is prohibited by law from possessing a gun.
Can you say that one more time? Just
Yes.
sort of.
Yes.
Say it about 20 times.
Yeah.
The majority of regulators in the United States do not check whether armed security guards are prohibited from possessing a gun.
Even when the agency, the same part of an agency regulates armed guards, also professionally runs for concealed weapons permits, does that exact check, prohibited possessor, they don't then run it on the armed guards. So if you're a citizen applying for a concealed carry, say in Arizona, that the same people who regulate guards will run that check, but then not run it on the guards.
So I go to a gun show. I want to buy a gun.
God.
I want to buy a firearm. I mean, we've been reporting a lot on this recently. There's the NICS system in place, which is the FBI background check. If I'm going to a licensed dealer, I have a background check run. Let's say that background check reveals that I was unfit to stand trial because of, some diagnosis of something that I have. There's a chance that I could then go apply for a job and get a job as a security guard and have a weapon in my hand.
Yes.
You both said that at once. Okay. Okay.
So
That sets
to
the
the-
scene for
Right.
Lucas.
So there are countless examples where someone who might not have, if they'd been checked through this database, might not have received a firearm permit, but they did become an armed security guard. And some of the categories in the database, which, as you know, David, include people with involuntary mental health commitments, substance abuse problems, domestic violence convictions, felony convictions. There's a whole host of categories of people who are prohibited by law from owning guns. So,
Just a itty-bitty connect the dot question.
yes.
If the person is not be permitted to own a gun, does that mean that the security agency then gives that person a gun, doesn't own it, but he
Yeah.
can possess it?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of security companies do different things. There are some security companies that own the guns and distribute them to the guards. But then a lot of security companies just require you to own and pay for your own equipment. So in the case of Lucas Kendall on the left here, his gun, I believe, was bought by his father. So I don't believe that it was registered to him.
So give us the story of Lucas. Give us the background of how he ended up at.
Yeah, so this is, Lucas Kendall is a guard who was working at a strip club in Miami, a strip club known for a high kind of crime rate. There were, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, there were 5 armed guards just patrolling the parking lot alone, and then armed guards inside patting people down, making sure you were not armed.
Sounds like a place we should all just go hang out later.
Yes. So Kendall had been working as an armed guard there for a while, but in the months leading up to the incident I'm about to tell you about, he'd been convicted of DUI, retail theft. He had been robbed, and so he had some traumatic brain injury. And we later find out he also had substance abuse problems. So
a criminal record. I mean, it was.
he had a criminal record.
Okay.
he had been licensed as an armed guard, and then he was convicted of several of these crimes. And so, but he returned to work, and he was working one night at this parking lot, in the parking lot at the strip club, and just arrived for work. He went over to his car. He put on all of his equipment, a bulletproof vest, his gun, his badge, kind of like a SWAT team kind of look. And then he saw these two guys sitting in a car near his, these were two African American men. One is Michael Smathers, the other Kewan Bird. And what he says happened is they both got out, started getting out of their car simultaneously, making upward motions with their arms from their waistbands. And he immediately interpreted that as a lethal threat and started shooting. And he shot Michael Smathers, eventually leaving him paralyzed, and Kewan Bird fell out of the car and started crawling underneath the car for safety, and he shot him several times in the back. And neither one of them were armed. And what's a little unusual in this case is that he was charged with murder in Florida, so he's currently facing those charges. But Kewan Bird died and Michael Smathers was left paralyzed. And, he went to jail, and in jail he was diagnosed with several severe mental health conditions. He was on the schizophrenia spectrum. He had delusional disorders. And so, this is the kind of thing where we don't know, if Kendall or other armed guard applicants were subjected to some kind of mental health examination, whether that would have prevented him from getting a guard license. But one of the things that we found out during our multiple surveys of each state is that only 4 states do a mental health evaluation.
4.
4 states, right? So this is common for all police officer applicants, and only 4 states do require that of armed security guards.
Is Florida one of them?
Florida is not one of them.
Okay, so had he been diagnosed previous, he might have been able to get this job and been in that position without any sort of mental health examination.
Exactly.
Sean, I'm trying to remember. Had he undergone any sort of court-ordered evaluation as part of as his other cases, earlier cases had moved through?
I don't believe so, but he was subjected to these psychological evaluations in jail after the shooting because he was insisting on representing himself. And in fact, there's strange parallels to the Trayvon Martin case because Kewan Bird's mother, Arlene Bird, worked with Trayvon Martin's aunt, and when that shooting occurred, she said, I feel like this could have been my son. And
when Trayvon was killed.
When Trayvon Martin was killed, and literally like a few months later, this happened to her son. And so Lucas Kendall, in jail, facing these charges, felt like this was a conspiracy created by the Black community, and he was being subjected to the same scorn as George Zimmerman, and so he was insisting on representing himself and fighting, not even acknowledging the charges, and so he underwent the psychological evaluation to determine if he was competent to stand trial.
What did Florida state officials tell you when you talked to them about this case and whether or not they should be doing something differently in terms of oversight, in terms of looking at potential candidates in these jobs?
Well, Florida in some cases did a better job of some things than other states. For example, the firearm discharge laws. In Florida, they're required to be submitted to regulators, and they did a really good job of investigating security guard shootings and taking immediate action. So there were some things that Florida was doing that other states simply were not doing.
What is the lesson from Lucas's case, do you think?
Well, part of it is, usually if there's any sort of criminal event, let's just say, whether it be an arrest or if police officers are immediately flagged. There's a whole host of industries that are regulated where that automatically prompts an inquiry, a red flag, a suspension, something that where there's all additional monitoring on that person, or even a restraint on whether that person can continue doing their job. I mean, people who work in childcare facilities in most places, if you're arrested, the regulatory body overseeing you is notified. There, we found, not just in Florida, but a number of places, significant lag, and sometimes just a failure to notify at all until sometimes the courts, after a conviction, would put out an all call. But by then, it's that was one of the really. It wasn't treated for what it is, which is an industry that is working with deadly weapons, and that we put in charge of sometimes enforcing law, or we implied enforcing laws and standing between us and harm.
I love asking questions. It's what I do, and I really enjoy it. I could keep doing it, but I really want to ask your questions, but we need more of them. So if you have a question, write them down, and we have people who are, I see one right there, who are coming to collect them, and we'll get to them really soon.
Why don't the people who are collecting questions raise your hands up and then Thank you.
Ryan, you bring up a really interesting point, that the fact that these armed guards are sort of wearing clothing that might suggest they are police officers or make them look like police officers at least gives us the impression that they might be sort of enforcing the law in a position of authority. And that sort of seems to change the dynamic, right? Because there are places, there are places where it is totally lawful to carry a weapon, and someone could stand outside their home or their own business and be protecting the business and not be wearing a uniform. So the chances of something happening, it's always there if it's lawful to carry a weapon, but does this make it different? That they're in these positions of being an armed guard, so to speak?
I think it's not supposed to in many cases. Part of the uniform, I think, is that's what's desired by the customers. They want to create that feeling of that presence of law enforcement. But one of the things we found in actually one of the cases that might be highlighted up there, Joshua Kosashenko.
Middle right there.
We found that law enforcement oftentimes handled violent events where it was really questionable use of deadly force differently than if it were a regular person. Joshua Kosashenko was a security guard, armed security guard, who in June 2009 shot and paralyzed a young man, Daniel Tarango, who was driving his friends away they went on a food run at 2 in the morning and went and stole chips and burritos. And the gas station had hired a company to basically try to detain shoplifters, to physically detain them. And for some reason, they decided that would include armed guards. Joshua had I believe he was 19 at the time of the shooting. He had a criminal history as a juvenile, 2 offenses, 2 convictions essentially, that both involved weapons. One of which involved him shooting somebody with a pellet gun when I think he was 11, and the other one, he actually had a weapon that he brought onto school grounds at 13. He had been barred from owning or possessing a firearm by the court as a result of the second offense. In fact, when he turned 18, he filed a motion with the court to request that be lifted because he wanted to become a police officer. The court said, no, not yet. There was a set amount of time, I think it was 15 or an extended amount of time, that he was not going to be legally allowed to possess a firearm. So he was denied it very explicitly by the court. He then decided to become a security guard, and Arizona's regulators, Department of Public Safety, didn't, and I'm not sure if they have changed this yet, check the prohibited possessor list. And so they did a criminal background check, and there's different types of background checks and what's included. The one that they didn't include juvenile records, and they didn't run prohibited possessor, which should have flagged Joshua and probably would have. And so they approved him. And he started working as an armed guard, and 6 weeks after he started, 2 in the morning in Tucson, he's sitting in the back of this gas station convenience store, and they see on the screen a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old kids grabbing food and rushing out. He and his partner, who was unarmed, give chase. His partner tackles one of the shoplifters as the guy was diving into the car. Joshua went to the driver's side, and his statement is that he thought that the driver was trying to back over his partner, who was not in the way of the vehicle. It's
Sketchy.
It's sketchy, and the detectives for the Pima County Sheriff's Office didn't believe it. It's very clear on the record. Anyhow, without much hesitation, he fired 3 rounds, one of which severed the spine of Mr. Tarango.
You know, as the three of us were emailing about this, I was really struck by something that you pointed out. You know, we and so many other news organizations have been doing this reporting about really the delicate task of trying to prevent people with mental illness who might be a danger from having weapons without stigmatizing, without stereotyping, without violating a person's rights. And it's such a delicate dance.
Or wrongfully implying that
wrongfully
the
implying
vast
that
majority of
who have
people with mental illness
exactly.
are not a harm to the public in any way, shape, or form.
But somehow, meanwhile, we're focusing all of that energy on sort of protecting us from people with mental illness who
From
could be
ourselves.
dangerous, and we're allowing people who might present a danger with mental illness and just basically handing them weapons in a way.
Or have a documented history with problems with weapons that, who knows if it has anything to do with mental illness or not, but where you can see, okay, well, this person's twice been convicted on weapons-related charges. Maybe we shouldn't give them a license to carry a gun on the job.
I want to open it to questions, but before I do, just let me ask you both to reflect on what should happen next, if anything. I mean, are there things that states, that the federal government, that the industry can do based on what you have seen that might sort of close these loopholes and make this a safer industry and make us safer?
Well, I mean, I think there have been many attempts, even dating back to the 90s, to improve the screening and training requirements for armed security guards. And since the stories came out, there have been a few states that have proposed bills that would increase those requirements. For example, in California, there was a bill that was introduced that would have required mental health evaluations for armed security guards. But generally, by and large, there seems to be a lack of interest in improving and increasing the regulations for armed security guards.
Lack of interest.
A lack of interest, yeah. And also pushback. I mean, there have been many in the security industry who have called for higher training standards and requirements. But there are many in the security industry who have argued against that, that it would be bad for business, that it would lead to, that it would help larger security companies rather than small ones. And there's also been a lot of pushback from the retail and restaurant industry associations who've argued that putting requirements on guards working in those establishments would push business out to contract security companies. And also, another source of the pushback is regulatory agencies. I mean, a lot of these requirements would add time and would require a lot of resources and money, and so it's not a responsibility that a lot of agencies, understandably, would want to incur.
And as currently constructed, a lot of these regulatory bodies are processing paperwork rather than running background checks. I mean, their entire sort of world view of how you manage the jobs they currently have is completely, has nothing in connection with what would be required to do that job. And where they're actually constantly monitoring, for convictions, for any mental health evaluations, for a history with that makes them a prohibited possessor.
And this really
I'm going to put that slide on, actually, so you can see the numbers.
have no idea how much work those numbers required.
Yes, and I need to call out Rachel Bale and Aaron Williams, I believe, who's also here. You should raise your hands, you guys.
Stand up.
Rachel, Rachel did a tremendous job surveying the entire country to find out some of these numbers. And Aaron did this amazing interactive map, which I encourage all of you to go onto our website and check out. You can look up the requirements in where you live and just toggle around and see what the situation is in the United States, because it's pretty amazing.
Well, the slide before, it was 15 states require firearms training. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Well, that actually sets up one of the questions
I'm
we
sorry,
have.
do not require firearms training.
15 states do not require
Not
firearms
require
training.
firearms training.
We have one question here, which is how much training do armed security guards get on average, and how does this compare to training for police and other occupations?
Oh, I'm trying to remember the average number of hours. I mean, because it was highly variable among states from 8 to 24, and it was oftentimes, a one-time training, whereas sworn officers go through training at least annually.
Right, and I can speak, I remember California required 54 total hours of training.
Of firearms training?
Not firearms training. The firearms training was about 14 hours. So
most of these training also is spent at a range, rather than going through the sort of larger issues of how to respond to violent incidents or manage the firearm. It's can they shoot, and to have the experience pulling the trigger.
Right. There's very little curriculum even defined in the law, but also the curriculum that is there really doesn't focus much on use of force, excessive, when to use force, when to not use force. I mean, those topics are really rarely covered by the law. But what I was going to say is in California, it's 54 hours of training total, including unarmed guard training. And for police officers, it's 600. And there were some funny numbers, comparisons too. Like in some states, manicurists were required to complete so many more hours of training than security guards.
Not firearms, but I mean training in...
Oh no,
Right,
they're
not
packing heat.
firearms training. That's a good
To be clear,
distinction.
this is really amazing because I went through hostile environment training just because I'm a journalist and could be in a hostile environment, and
Sounds cool.
It was great, but it learned all sorts of stuff about weapons and what to do in certain situations and how to get out of a certain situation and when, how not to allow a situation to escalate.
Right.
And it didn't feel like much, but I was happy I got it. It sounds like that was more training in those other things than a lot of people who are actually holding weapons and are in a position of authority might ever get. I mean,
Yes.
they're literally at a fire range just shooting and then...
Yes, absolutely.
And the worst part, at least especially for the guards, is they are the ones at most risk here. Homicide is the leading cause of on-the-job death for security guards.
Security guards are more likely to die by shooting than a police officer.
Wow. And what do you make of that? I mean, why is that?
Well, I think, excuse me, I have a cold, so I apologize. I mean, there's some very large differences between police officers and security guards, like we touched on before. One is that security guards don't have the same authority as police officers. But also think about when a police officer is out working and they encounter a dangerous situation, they could call for backup and it's there pretty much immediately. There's someone they can call for help. A security guard typically does not have that luxury. I mean,
Vulnerable and exposed.
By
Exactly.
themselves, aren't usually working with a partner, let alone have an entire force behind them when trouble arises. And there's a lot of discussion and debate about how we train police officers to handle these situations, and that's legitimate. But there's no comparison to what police officers learn about de-escalation to what armed security guards learn, if they learn anything at all. So, I mean, some of them are actually directly instructed by their employer not to pull out the gun that they've been issued from their holster. You can have a gun, but never pull it out.
the question cards asked for someone to state their profession, and the person who asked this question said retired copy editor. And it's actually, I'm having pangs of fear from my newspaper days because this feels like the kind of
We're in
question I would have
trouble.
gotten from a copy editor at 11 o'clock at night being
screwed
like,
something
"I
up."
should have included that in my story." So this retired copy editor asks, did your reporting include sitting in on training sessions, and what was the firearms training like?
Show?
Yeah, well, I did not. I went through just different aspects of the firearms training in California. I didn't do the entire thing, but
You went through some of it. I mean, as
I
if you
did.
were being trained.
Yes, and but I did go. I did sit through the entire training. You know, in order to become an armed security guard, you have to first get your guard card in California, and that requires you to take an 8-hour class and take a security guard exam. So I sat through the entire 8-hour class, and the exam was open book. It was an open book exam. So it was a multiple choice exam. You had the multiple choice questions, and then the manual. And
Well, isn't life open book, Show? I mean, why are we judging?
well, I have to say,
I used to love open book exams. I don't like that these open book exams.
well,
are.
even though it was open book, I still. That's the thing.
She's a guard right now.
Charles,
She's on duty.
we
Working
are
at the
sitting with a
museum
licensed
tonight.
guard to my left.
I actually got like 3 questions wrong, even though it was open book,
Out of how many?
out of like 30.
Okay.
And so I handed it to the instructor, and he marked off which ones were wrong, and he gave it back to me, and I looked up the correct answers and fixed it, and I passed.
So everyone was able to get to 100 eventually. They could just say,
Yeah, exactly.
go to page 33 and you'll find the answer to that one.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and that's an excellent question. These trainers, though, are in the business of getting people licensed, not in serving as gatekeepers. They're not, most of the trainers aren't government affiliated. They're private businesses that, they're paid their amount, and people aren't going to keep coming to them if there's a high, rejection rate.
This is a great question because I know you brought it up in your stories in another way that security guards can really be vulnerable. What can a security guard do in the face of a threat, and what are the alternatives to using weapons?
Well, no, the question about legal authority, what are they legally authorized to do?
What can a security? I mean, the part of this that interests me, but I want you to answer it anyway, is that you talked about that a lot of armed guards are not given other types of weapons that might de-escalate.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
very rarely. I mean, batons, tasers, those all actually require. I'm trying to think if I ever saw licensing on a taser. I mean, there are batons for license.
Few states require licenses for those things, but
You might need a license for a baton, but not for a gun?
I'm not sure about that. I think that
No.
in a couple
If
of
there's
states.
baton licensing, there's also firearm licensing.
Okay.
Yeah,
But, I mean-
what I was going to say is a lot of companies require guards to pay for their own equipment, and there may not be a requirement that guards carry other types of weapons. So many guards are walking around with guns only, as opposed to other things they could use, such as a baton, or a flashlight, or pepper spray. That's probably what I would go to first.
Police officers are given these
Handcuffs.
tools, in the expectation that they will have to engage in violent events. Armed guards are oftentimes given them, firearms purely as a deterrent, like a DUI checkpoint. They're not trying to catch drunks. They're just trying to get the hope that it'll prevent people from doing something. Once that thing is happening, regardless, it's a pretty big problem, because there's very little to tell these folks how to respond. And most of the time, the only tool they're given is the gun.
And what about what can a security guard do in the face of a threat? Like, what are the guidelines as far as you know? What are they taught?
Legally speaking, they can do what anyone in this room can do, and there's self-defense, and then some of those vary on a state-by-state basis. I don't remember ever seeing any special authority on use of force for armed guards, but I could be forgetting.
I think there are some states that do specify what kind of force you can use and when. California is one of those states. But I would say that a lot of the times what we saw in the discharge reports and news reports was guards using their weapons inappropriately, such as firing warning shots or firing after fleeing individuals. which is-
Cars leaving parking lots,
Right.
spinning their gun in the office and accidentally shooting their coworker.
Right. Yes, that actually happened.
That
Human
happened.
beings.
That happened.
And what was the scenario?
Well, there was that not shooting his coworker, but there was a guard who said he was practicing gun tricks in his car while he was on duty.
Gun tricks.
Yeah, like he watched some videos on YouTube and was practicing.
Like spinning the gun on his
Yeah.
finger, or
I'm assuming. I don't really know for sure, and he shot himself in the leg. And then there was another guard that was doing something similar, and his gun went off, and it went through the wall of the apartment complex into someone's front closet door.
Are these the kinds of cases that have prompted some in the industry to say, please give us some regulations and give us some certainty and
Yes.
help us
Yes.
help the people who are employed in these jobs?
Yes, I think it's not good for a security company or an apartment complex when a guard is shooting himself in the leg or accidentally shooting somebody else.
I think you have a fair point. Here's another question from occupation a journalist. There are a few of us in the room. What impact have your stories had? Law changes, regulations approved, etc.
Let's see. I know like I said before, there have been several states that have proposed or introduced bills that would create
California
some
was
changes.
one of them, right?
California was one of them. Arizona was contemplating something like that. I think Missouri or Michigan was one of them. I don't know how much traction ultimately they received, but there was an acknowledgement among some regulators and some lawmakers that this is a concern. And Kiwan Bird's family.
And Kiwan Bird was killed by Lucas, the armed guard at the Miami
Lucas
strip
Kendall,
club, right?
that's
Okay.
right, that's right. They were really upset about this, obviously. Kiwan was his mother's only child. And so they've really tried to push for some changes at the federal level. I don't know if I don't think it led to really any changes, but they created a petition that's received something like 60 or 70,000 signatures. Yeah, I can't think of anything
The arc of
else.
history is long. There had been legislation introduced, but no significant momentum that pushed it through. And a lot of the times, anything that has a dollar amount attached to it, as refurbishing a regulatory agency always does, even in good times, that can kill legislation.
Here's a good question. Any places that are, quote, doing it right?
Our editors kept asking that.
Pesky editors.
I think there were a few states that were doing. Certain states were doing certain things.
Doing better, certainly.
Yeah, better. Like I said, Florida did, I thought, a really good job of investigating security guard shootings, and
Georgia less so.
Georgia less so. That's right. When a security guard shot his or her gun, Florida would find out about it pretty quickly, usually, and take immediate action. So, in a lot of other states, I mean, as we pointed out before, most states are not tracking security guard shootings. But in some of the states that are, they would wait and see what the police did. Do the police file criminal charges? If they do, they'd wait for the charges to go through the criminal justice system, which can take years. So there were quite a few guards who were charged with serious crimes but allowed to continue working as armed guards, despite the fact that they shot somebody.
I believe Virginia did at least their own independent investigations of incidents.
Right.
So they were, when something happened and they were notified of it, there was at least an independent set of eyes that tried to figure out what had happened.
And
Sounds like you're not
Oklahoma-
convinced that anyone is doing it right. You see.
even states that had a flurry of activity, like, California had a ton of regulation and a ton of paperwork required, most of which they wouldn't let us see, or tried to charge us $20,000 to see, or said they couldn't access because of their 30-year-old computer system or whatever. All standard stuff. I mean, whether all that activity protects anyone and actually results in a net change is sort of unclear. And yet, basic things like why doesn't every single state run a prohibited possessor check on, the states that at least that even regulate the armed guards at all. I think was it 12 that do nothing at all, or but even
And prohibited possessor would be someone who could not buy a gun.
not allowed, not just buy, not allowed to possess a firearm
Anywhere.
and in any way, shape, or form. That seems like a pretty simple first step.
We have about 10 minutes or so left, and I want to sort of shift a little bit and focus on your journalism, because we have a number of questions about kind of the journalism and the approach. What was one of the harder public record requests to get? I'm sure all of them were easy, right? Was there something you wanted but didn't get, and what advice do you have for dealing with so many agencies on a single issue?
You want to talk about Louisiana?
This is the horror story we're about to hear?
Oh my gosh.
The craziest box I've ever received. Box of crazy.
We requested, we wanted to determine, has there been growth in armed security guards? And there's no data really about that, but there is licensing data. So we requested from a lot of states their licensing databases so we could see how many licenses were being issued per year and if there was growth. So it turns out that there was a lot of growth. In like 4 or 5 years, I think Virginia armed guard licenses increased by over like 400% or something like that.
When you say not all states even license armed guards, these are
That's
states
right.
that actually do license.
Exactly. Louisiana, it grew by like over 1,000%. So anyway, we requested from Louisiana the firearm discharge reports and the licensing database. And what we got was a humongous, extraordinarily heavy box of mangled, crumpled
paper
pages.
Like we open it up and the top 3 layers were crumpled paper. Not like it got roughed up on the way. Somebody crumpled the paper and put it on top. And these were not like to protect the paper.
It's out of anger?
These were records that had been crumpled by hand and placed on top.
And there was like weird stuff in there, like a
disturbing.
screenplay or manuscript or something was in there.
Manuscript.
Yeah.
Just in case we know an agent.
And we got another box from North Carolina that
shredded.
had someone's bank statements in it with their social security number.
Records marked confidential that had been shredded and then provided to us in shred form.
Maybe they were bribing you and saying, "Don't do this story, but if I'll give you a social security
I looked
number."
into some software that would sort of compile it all together, but it was way too much work. Some Israeli company, I spent $200 on it and then never used it because it just was beyond what I was willing to put into it. I also should note, though, that some of the licensing databases that didn't come easily from agencies, we had my good friend and former colleague, Augie Armendariz, who's now at the New York Times, scrape at least California's database.
Yep.
And did you do Florida too? I feel like you did Florida.
I don't remember.
Before there was at least a valiant effort at getting Florida before
Yeah.
they ultimately complied.
Yep.
I love this question because I think it comes up often in our profession. I think especially when you're doing courageous reporting like the two of you, holding an industry to account, dealing with public officials. Do you feel a responsibility to be an advocate in addition to being a reporter?
No. No, I mean, I feel like as long as you're an advocate for the truth in your readers, you're gonna, hopefully what needs to play out will. I think the more you step on the scale, the more you undermine, I've never felt conflicted about this personally because, usually the truth, it's hard enough to get that without trying to formulate, well, what's my opinion about this, and I think that in terms of connecting with the audience and letting, and them actually feeling compelled, when you just tell them straight, I've found that people get much more energized and angry about what you've discovered?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to, after you've gathered all this information and you've talked to all these people, to figure out what it all means. And that's kind of how I view my role as an investigative reporter. I mean, we start out with maybe a hypothesis, but really you want to start out by asking questions, and those questions could be answered in so many different ways. If you're an advocate, to me that indicates that you're coming at it with a particular perspective, and I think you just want to be totally open to what the material says.
I get asked this question so much. Can I use
Really?
what the two of you just said? Because it's really, I mean, the idea of being an advocate for the truth. I mean, that's very powerful.
And when everyone gets done rolling their eyes at me for saying that, but
No, I think that's really articulated well. This is sort of a related question. You were very tough on this industry and tough on kind of loopholes that you feel exist and needed to be exposed. Does the industry, or do people in the industry who you've spoken with, do they feel like you were fair?
I think a lot of people in the industry did feel that way, but there were some who felt maybe like there are many people in the security industry who do a very good job and do a job that we're asking of them constantly. I mean, it's not just the security industry or the regulators that are a part of this, but us as a society, we have come to expect that armed guards will protect us in many, many situations. So honestly, most of the security industry people that I talked to were very supportive of the stories, but there were some who were.
Guards in particular were some of the best sources for calling out, because they're the ones in harm's way. They're the ones being paid $23,000 a year, and their income decreasing as they get older. They're peaking at 35 or so, and then becoming less valuable with more experience. We're asking quite a bit of them, and not giving them anything they need to do the job that we're demanding, and the huge segments of just all kinds of businesses are going into and contracting with firms to have these services. So I mean, it's a major government failure, I would say, first and foremost. Industry has certainly been a leading. Larger companies that have lobbying efforts have pushed for basic standards uniformly. Now, is part of the motivation there that it does put a cost on smaller firms that the big firms are already incurring? Well, it could be. That would probably be one of the effects. But I think a lot of them are lobbying in good faith. They want to know what we're supposed to be doing here.
I could not think of a better final question to ask the two of you. What's your next dream project?
None of your business.
Okay, then. You said none of your business, in case you didn't hear it. He was joking. It was very just joking.
You'll see it coming.
I'm on the human trafficking beat now. So if anyone has any story ideas, feel free to come talk to me afterwards.
If there are potential sources in the room.
That's right.
What are you especially interested in, or is it still kind of?
I think I'll plead what Ryan just said.
We'll tell you 2 hours before it hits publish.
Maybe after a couple drinks.
Oh, that's good to know. Do you have any focus that's interesting you at the moment?
Your business. No, I mean I work at a wonderful place that I cover criminal justice, but if I find a great story, I don't care. They want important journalism that that could help people.
Well, I cannot think of more important journalism than this project that the two of you have
Thank you very
pulled
much.
off. And congratulations. It's important work. It inspires all of us. And you two are so young, and it's so great that you have such bright futures. And we're going to see many projects like this from both of you. So huge applause.
I want to thank you all for coming. I think you can see what an inspiration it is to run a program like this, how inspired we get every year in New York when we present these awards. I want to thank David for being a great moderator. Thank the winners for being who they are, and they're great men and women. And I want to thank you also, David, for the kind words you had for me. Very much appreciated. And I now see that if the pay goes down in the armed guards industry as you get older, I don't think I'm going to look there for further work.
Not a time to start.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you. Great job.